Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk should not be becoming obscenely rich from the use of resources that were created by all. And of course, I'm an artist. I don't have any money. I come from a family which didn't have money. I don't have savings or whatever. I have to earn a living. So, I think it made people ask, what am I doing with my life? Really, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah, welcome to the Idea and UT show, Mr. John. John, we are thrilled to have you on the show. Me and Uttam have been doing this for the past 8 months, to be precise. We have had about 3 shows, one including ourselves and the rest with some Indian guests from our first and second circles. So you would really be the first international face in this program. Our intent of doing this is probably a bit different from the rest of the podcasters, but I would like to tell you that we are in this to create a digital asset for our guests, which they can share with their friends and families for years to come. And then it stays within that circle, right? And we, on our side, we do the social media marketing, and we try to get this podcast out to as many people as we can. We have had about 900 hours of viewing time for the 3 episodes that we have aired. But yeah, I and Uttam, like I said, we're thrilled to have you on the show. Yes, any opening statements from you, John? Please feel free. This is a free-flowing conversation.
No, it's a joy to be here. It's lovely to meet the both of you. I'm looking forward to seeing where a free-flowing conversation will go. And yeah, let's take this international meeting wherever it's going to head.
Absolutely. I'm super excited, John. Let's start.
All right. So, John, to start with, if you want to let our viewers know anything that you want to share about your journey so far, would be a great place to start. So where were you born? Where are you now? And everything in between.
Everything? You want everything? How long is this broadcast going to be? I've been around for 58 years, and a lot of things happen in 58 years. I was born in North Wales in the United Kingdom, English parents, but North Wales. My dad was a teacher, my mum was a nurse. They're both from working class backgrounds, but had sort of achieved a precarious middle class income and social position. I went to a boarding school where my father was a teacher. I was a music and academic scholarship boy at a vile, disgusting, bullying Christian missionary boarding school where my dad was a teacher. I was a noisy, arty, creative, smart boy in a school that worshipped rugby playing. It was a horrible experience. I got bullied to hell for about 4 years. And that stuff has an effect on life. So part of, my life journey is dealing with the anxiety that comes from childhood bullying and so on. I left school, became an artist in one way or another. I started off as an actor, then I became a director, became a teacher. And I spent 30 years training performers, initially actors, but then dancers, acrobats, circus performers, improvisers, musicians, visual artists, all over the world. I directed shows and taught all over the world. India, I lived in Australia for a while, so India, Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, China, Colombia, Mexico, America, all across Europe, and on and on and on. Created my own way of training performers, which is called Self with Others. Particularly, it's about how to be brilliant within an ensemble. People think that being in a team or an ensemble means that you lose your individuality. I say that's crap. I say that being in a team is the way that we shine. We shine best when we are in a high-functioning team. And increasingly, as I did all that and I traveled the world and so on, I became more and more interested in what actors know, the deep level skills of a performer are actually life skills. I mean, just think for a moment about what does an actor have to do? I'm not talking about the surface level of, acting technique, how to say Shakespeare and so on. That's all cool. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking deep level skills. What does an actor have to do? An actor has to play his or her role authentically. Whatever they're doing, whatever role they're playing, they have to be authentic within that. They have to be believable. They have to communicate. They need to understand the relationship between their body and their mind. They need to understand their limitations and how to overcome them. They need to connect with other people. They need to access their creativity continually. They need to be able to collaborate so that they empower others while also sticking to their own needs and agendas. They need to be present. They need to be spontaneous. And they need to be able to react appropriately. Hell, these aren't acting skills. These are life skills. Imagine if all of us were better at being able to collaborate, being truly present with each other, empowering others without giving up our own power, being authentic, really authentic in everything we did. Imagine how much better that would make things. So my passion increasingly became what an actor knows is of profound importance to anyone in any sphere of life: business people, parents, educators, community activists, on and on, spiritual leaders, all of the rest of it. And then we had a world event, didn't we? We had a pandemic. Well, that wiped my career out just like that, because I was traveling continually and going into rooms and working with people, and the pandemic wasn't too good. People who traveled continually and with people. And then I had a heart attack as well. I had a complete burnout, complete breakdown, and all the rest of it. And so now my passion and my interest is I coach people, I work as a consultant, I mentor people, many of them artists, but not all artists by any means. I work with religious leaders, I work with activists, I work with business people, I'm a consultant and so on. Looking at this question of how we can live better. Frankly, the way we're living is not working. The more affluent societies get, the higher the suicide rate goes. We are going in the West and elsewhere through a mental health crisis. The economy is crashing the biosphere. We are literally going to make it impossible for humans to exist on this earth. We won't destroy the earth. The earth will recover. It'll just get rid of us first, because of the way we interact, our economic systems, our social systems, and so on. And it's a personal thing. It's also a society thing. It's an economic thing. It's a political thing. And my passion now is to work with people and say, come on, guys, we can do this better. We can live better. And I say that what an actor has to learn how to do contains invaluable information that can be used by everyone, whether you are running a restaurant, whether you're running a company, whether you are doing personal development work, a teacher in a classroom. And so, yeah, that's my job now. I consult with people, I write books, I do a lot of thinking. And now that I live in a very remote part of Ireland, I do a lot of walking on the beach and wondering how we can make the world a better place.
Oh, wonderful. I wish there were more. I'm sure there are more like you, but that's exactly what we need. More sustainable ways of living on this planet. And before I move it to Uttam, I wanted to ask this first question. I think when you said when you were young, you were talking about your school, doesn't look like was a great experience. Would you like to talk through it a little bit more? What was that experience like, and where did it leave you? Looking back, what do you feel, and what was the experience like?
Well, there's two sort of experiences that go hand in hand. First of all, there is the experience of being sent away to boarding school. It is generally acknowledged now that sending a child away to boarding school, I was 8 when I was sent away to school. It was actually only across the road or from where my parents lived. So I would go to bed in boarding school, seeing the window of my bedroom in my own house, but no longer being able to go there. It's generally accepted that psychologically, the experience of being sent away to a boarding school is an intensely destructive experience, potentially intensely destructive experience. One of the leading psychologists in this area, or psychotherapist by the name of Joy Shavarian, who named boarding school syndrome as a thing that many boarding school people have. She said, effectively, there is no difference psychologically for a child at 7. There's no difference between a child who's sent to boarding school and a child who's sent into care or a child who's sent to an orphanage, except the child in care or the child in an orphanage generally knows their parents didn't choose to send them away. Whereas a boarding school child is going through the disruption and the removal of their security, the sense of being at home, knowing that their parents want them. There's wanted to throw them out, wanted to get rid of them. That's how the child feels. What did I do wrong? Because my parents have thrown me out of relationship with them, but also the security of family pets and soft toys you have around, all of the stuff that children need to feel secure. So there's that side of boarding school. And I think it's generally accepted now that boarding schools are a phenomenally bad idea psychologically for a vast number of children. And the slightest look at the way that the British government is run by a load of ex-public school boys will show you the psychological damage of boarding school. A load of entitled twerps who think that they have a right to run things and have not the slightest capacity to make an emotional connection with the people who will suffer the consequences of their actions. It's all a game for them to get power and wealth. And if it leaves millions of children relying on food banks, they don't care. And I would draw a direct link between the psychology of boarding school and some of the worst effects of that on British government. But the other thing about boarding school is that while I was there, I was bullied. It was sort of always going to happen. I was noisy and creative and weird. I was also a teacher's son. My dad was very old and semi-retired by the time I got to school. Not popular because he was by then seen as a grumpy old man. He probably was a grumpy old man. It was always going to happen, but when it did happen, it was devastating. I remember it absolutely. One day we had a room which was a sort of the form room where, people from my sleeping house would do their evening equivalent to homework and so on. That was the form room where I had my desk. And one day I came back and my desk had been trashed and my pencil case had been stolen, which was found in a urinal where everyone had done their business on it. All my textbooks had graffiti written in them. The writing I recognized as being as coming from my closest friends. They had all been leading the process of destroying me. And for 3 years, I was subjected to some physical violence, certainly some physical violence, but massive psychological and emotional violence, exclusion, shaming, being made to feel like a freak, the constant anxiety of not knowing when the next attack was coming. And it could come in the middle of the night. I mean, you're in a room sharing with other, boys, and maybe 5 of them will pile on and beat the hell out of you at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're fast asleep. Anxiety is 24 hours in that situation. And, there are consequences to that. You spend decades afterwards wondering where the next attack is coming from. You spend decades wondering whether somebody who says they're a friend is actually a friend or is just, I trust too much and I trusted not enough. I went too far with people and I didn't go far enough. I'm not interested in sitting around saying poor me. I'm saying that the reality is that things that happen in childhood, particularly things that destroy a child or adolescent self-respect and security, those things echo through life. And part of my personal journey has been about having to deal with the consequences of that and take therapeutic interventions from people to, to understand myself. A journey, of course, it's called life. We learn and grow.
No, John, I'm sure it had a lasting, impact on you, that we are still talking, you're talking still so passionately about it and strongly about it after 50 years. Now, I'm sure that's probably getting bullied would be the parents' worst nightmare. But my question to you is, how did it all leave your relationship with your parents at that time and subsequently in the coming years after that, following years?
Yeah, it's a really complicated question. It's a very important question, but it's a really complicated one. And it went through phases. Both my parents are dead now, but it went through phases. There was certainly time, maybe even decades, where I simply never tried to pick up the strands of closeness with my parents. They were just my parents, and I was sort of distant and fairly respectful, but I never felt any warmth or emotion particularly towards them. There were moments within that when I would feel deep emptiness in myself and would try hard to make those connections with my parents and usually fail. And there were moments of deep anger. That process really lasted for decades. But then as my parents began to get significantly older and more frail, I guess I observed two things. First of all, how damaged they were by their upbringings. I mean, my father was the product of a dysfunctional family with, poverty and alcoholism within the mix. My mother was a product of deep, massive poverty. Single parent family back in the 1920s and 1930s, absent father, deep poverty, alcoholic and so on, dysfunction within the family as well, violence, definitely. My mother was enormously damaged. And as I began to see that, and as I began to see some of the damage in my own behavior, which I could say that came from me going to boarding school, but then I could see how my parents' choices came from the damage they had encountered. I began to realize it's a truism. They did the very, very best that they could. And anger was understandable, but pointless. I mean, for my mum, who grew up and left school semi-literate at 15 and, really made something of her life. She became a nurse, she had a lifelong career in the nursing services, even though she couldn't work for the NHS after a while because as she was training, she got tuberculosis and was given up for dead because she was looking after soldiers coming back from the war. And back then there was no treatment for tuberculosis. So they just basically said, we'll put you in a sanatorium. You'll either survive or not. And she did. And she taught herself to read and she read poetry and all of that stuff. She was an amazing person. But I wasn't very close to her. But I also realized that for her to have given her child the chance to go to the sort of school that she could only have dreamed of was an act of extreme courage and generosity. And it was also an act which had, for me, really bad consequences. So there's the anger's useless, but also there's a realization that however good you think your actions are, you don't know the effect they will have on other people. And so we have to be in this constant process of self-reflection. And then, of course, that makes me realize that I've done things which have hurt other people when I had not the slightest intention of hurting other people, and so on. And so I guess begins to make you humble. And so was the bullying at boarding school a good thing? Of course not. Of course it wasn't. However, without it, some of the insights that I have about how to be and how to live and how to be a good teacher and how to coach, some of those insights I wouldn't have. So things are what they are, and my anger or frustration or regret, they mean nothing. Doesn't mean I don't feel the pain, but you know, the pain is there, but also that's why I say I'm not interested in being a victim. Nor do I condemn other people who are still in the process of exploring that they are a victim, because we all have to find how to survive the unintended consequences of the choices that are made for us as a child.
Absolutely.
How common that is, that your parents who have done something to you which causes great pain, and you desperately want them, you want to get back into their affection, which you feel yourself to have been alienated for. So they say, are you okay? You say, yes, yeah, of course I am. You didn't hurt me. I'm not angry. I'm not upset. Right. But that, of course, reinforces the alienation, because it isn't true. You're not okay. I was not okay at school. As an 8-year-old, when I was there going, you know, I'm crying from loneliness and fear. This was long before the bullying happened. This is just the fact that I no longer live in my home. I was not okay. And then I realized now that my mother couldn't say that to my father because of the, you know, very old style relationship. You know, father was born in 1912 or something. He was almost Victorian in his attitudes. Things echo from generation to generation, and everybody trying to do the best they can to survive and also to be kind to others. I didn't want to say to my mum and my dad, you messed my life up. All those sacrifices you made for me, I wish you hadn't. Right. You know, imagine saying that to your dad when he's 85. And he's looking back on his life and you say, oh, by the way, you made some really crap choices and you've destroyed your children. Or at least destroyed me. I mean, terrible thing to say. It would also contain some truth. So yeah, I really get what you're saying about, you know, it creates, you used the word alienation. I think that's such a good word. It creates it also, though, creates an alienation from yourself. You become alienated from yourself. Because what have I done wrong that my parents would want to throw me out of our home? And then when you put bullying into that, and this will be another whole thing which we don't need to go into particularly, but when you put bullying into that, if it's mass bullying, not just one person bullying another, but basically the community turning against you. We all want to belong. Belonging and connecting is a fundamental evolutionary biological human need. We need to connect. If you are in a community where you are excluded, one of the things certainly that I experienced is that I wanted to belong to the group. The group hated me. So the only way I could belong to the group was by learning to hate me. I learned to despise myself and mock myself and shame myself, because that was the only way I could feel that I belonged to the group of people who were mocking me, shaming me, and abusing me. And so that deep level of alienation is both external and internal.
If we may want to pull you back to the present, and you mentioned, I think those two were clear highlights in your journey. How did the pandemic really affect you, if you want to take us through that story? And also add, how do you see the world after the pandemic? What has evolved? What has changed according to you?
On a practical level, the pandemic stopped all my work. I was in India when the pandemic hit, and I'd been there for a few months, and I had a few more workshops to do. I was down in Bangalore when I really became aware of it, and I was meant to be getting on and going up to teach in where was I going? Agra, and then I was going up to Delhi. And I phoned the Agra people, and they went, we're not sure whether we're allowed to hold workshops. And then the Delhi people said, the city authorities have closed all workshop spaces. Lufthansa cancelled my flight. I sort of rushed back to Mumbai, found a new flight. By the time I got back to England, where I was living at the time, my diary was empty. 2 years of work in advance gone. There's people going, everything postponed, sorry, no commitments. And of course, I'm an artist. I don't have any money. I come from a family which didn't have money. I don't have savings or whatever. I have to earn a living. So, it put me in a position of going, right, what are you going to do about this? Now, I also had a heart attack just before the pandemic, so I was in recovery from that. And basically, I was badly, badly burnt out. And I had a complete breakdown and had to find a new way of earning a living and so on. You asked what the pandemic how it changed things. I think the pandemic revealed truths. I don't think it really created problems. I think it exposed the problems that were there already that we were busy ignoring. When suddenly people went, hold on, work from home, they began to question the obsession with productivity and going to the office continually and so on. When is that necessary? When is that not? When people encountered the deep isolation of pandemic, I think they began to question and notice the isolated nature of their lives before pandemic. The sense that things weren't actually all rosy, that there were difficulties and problems. The lack of community connectedness in the pandemic helped us see the lack of community connectedness before and since the pandemic. The questions about whether the pandemic actually came as a crossover from nature, which is still the most likely explanation, although I realize there are other explanations, make us question the way we are abusing, appallingly abusing the biosphere, the ecosystem we rely on. So I think it exposed a whole set of those things, and the poverty that the pandemic brought people face to face with. I mean, families whose children couldn't do their schoolwork because the family couldn't afford the internet. This is in Britain, in the fifth richest country in the world, and children can't afford. They're having to do their schoolwork off their parents' data on their phones, and their parents can't get contracts because they haven't got income, and all. It exposed the raw inequality of where capitalism has brought us. More than do better for the world, or I want to do better for my communities or my family, or I want to live my dream more, or I want to attach more to values and purpose. So I think the pandemic was a great magnifying glass that let us see problems that were there already. I don't think we have been very good at responding to what we discovered, because the whole push was go back to normal, get people back into the office, do this, do that. And I understand that. That's how the economic and political systems survive. I think as people, we have to go, that normal's dead. That was the 20th century normal. We're in the 21st century now. We've got to learn to live better. I don't have kids, but if I did, I would be appalled at what I was leaving my children as a legacy from my generation's life. We have got to learn to live better for our mental survival and for our species survival.
You know, we became a little more socialist than we used to be. We became more caring for other people. Do you think this is all temporary? Do you think things will go back to what it was pre-pandemic once everything falls back to where it was before?
Pendulums swing, don't they? We moved one way, we moved back. So my feeling is that the pendulum that moved one way during pandemic, also you saw it moving the other way. People become more and more obsessively individualistic, more and more aggressive and disconnected, often through various conspiracy theories and, you know, the demand by some people that they be permitted to, you know, in the face of medical evidence, not wear masks and things, and basically saying if you're vulnerable to the virus, I don't give a damn. I will demand my right to wander around and infect you, rather than take on any kind of collective responsibility. So the pendulum sort of swung in both directions. I don't know where things will go. My feeling is that things are becoming more and more extreme because the system within which we're working is becoming more and more unsustainable. My feeling is that massive change is coming because the environmental catastrophe, which is right now unfolding, will simply force change. It will force us to change. It might force change by there being a new pandemic which wipes out half the human race. Entirely possible. Biologically, whenever a species becomes overabundant, which humans have exploded over the last century, there's a biological event which causes die down, a massive reduction in the species. You see, it's part of the cycle of biology. Maybe it will be that. Maybe it will be the fact that, you know, I see now again India and Pakistan are both having to evacuate vast swathes of the country because of floods. As areas of the world become uninhabitable, there are going to be billions of people having to move to different parts of the world. Billions. At the moment, in the UK, people are getting upset about a couple of hundred coming over on boats. You know, hold on to your hats. There's a few billion who are going to have to move to the areas which are still habitable. In other words, we are going to face massive change. Our choice is whether we respond to that by planning, adapting, growing, developing as a species, or whether we have that change forced upon us as we try to resist it. You know, we're going to keep the migrants out, we're going to keep the refugees out, without asking where the billions who no longer have anywhere to live are going to go. We either adapt or we will be crushed. I mean, I've said for years, way from before the pandemic, for economic and biological reasons, a revolution is coming. Our choice is it going to be a peaceful revolution or a violent revolution? Our choice is it going to be a revolution that we guide or a revolution that crushes us? So you talk about things becoming a bit more socialistic and so on. Yeah, I think there's truth in that. It also became more individualistic in some ways, some sections of society. So both those things happened. Will the changes sustain or maintain? We're not going to have any choices unless we really get smart and start responding to what's happening. There are going to be changes. The system we are working in is collapsing. The economic system, the biological system, the social systems, all of them, they're all collapsing. Our job is to work out how we choose to respond to that. The change is going to happen. My solution is that we will navigate that change through this is the heart of my coaching and consultancy work, taking a 360-degree perspective on what's happening. We have to deal with inner change, the stuff that's going on inside each of us that we need to sort out. We need to deal with connectedness, how we interconnect with the world. And we need to deal with systems, how we change systems so that they are more human-based, more sustainable, rather than the systems we live in at the moment, which are frankly inhuman. They're anti-human. So I take a 360-degree approach that says, we've got to look inside, we've got to look at our connectedness, and we've got to look at the world, and we've got to adapt all of them. Otherwise, we're not going to survive.
Sure. And very well put. What you said in terms of interconnectivity, probably also empathy, also inner kind of delving inside as human beings, that's critical. I think we are a land of spiritualism, and we can't, agree more on that. In terms of business, you coach quite a few corporates, and you've been doing this. And I hear the voice where you say that the way we are going, sustainable, economically, socially. Do you have, on the economic side, do you have something of a solution that you think could actually get us out of the situation that we find ourselves in, post-pandemic especially?
Yeah, I don't claim to have hard and fast solutions. I have some starting points. For me, starting points are that we must radically and rapidly move away from a model of society and business which is based on extracting and using and discarding. People talk about the growth of a circular economy where everything which is used is created so that it can then be reused and repurposed, that there is almost no wastage or things thrown away. So this idea of an extractive economy, where basically ever since the 17th century in the West, all economic growth has been about taking something from the natural world, turning it into something, and then discarding the waste from it. And you can't keep taking stuff ad infinitum from a finite world. It's simply not possible. One start is to move away from extraction, the process of extraction through to discarding, and instead think in terms of everything being circular. What is the next use for every resource? It goes without saying that part of that means decarbonizing the economy and so on, but it's much bigger than that. Is that I think we need to revisit and reinvent the idea of the Commonwealth, that which belongs to everyone. Back, in farming, the way the peasant economy was pre-industrialization in the West, and it's very much like this in many other countries as well, there was an understanding that we live with shared resources. The privatization of resources And I don't just mean that in corporate terms of privatizing companies. I mean the fact that everything seems increasingly for sale or purchase by individuals or corporations denies the fact that we share things. The air that you pump smoke into is the air I must breathe. The water you take to irrigate your field is water I cannot use to irrigate my field. The internet that Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or whatever got rich from was created by generations of scientists working in publicly funded universities, paid for by the taxes that my parents and grandparents pay into the government. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk should not be becoming obscenely rich from the use of resources that were created by all. I don't mind if they get rich. They're innovators. They can get rich. But they should not be getting obscenely rich from resources which are created by all. We should all be getting rich from the money that internet entrepreneurs are earning. It's part of the Commonwealth. A private power company should not just be able to put up solar panels and capture sunlight and then sell it to us without paying significantly for the fact that their natural resources are shared resources. The sunlight is mine and yours. The water is mine and yours. The air is mine and yours. We need to look at the notion of all of us being enriched and enabled to survive by resources which belong to all of us. And I don't give a damn whether somebody's got a title deed to say they own a piece of land. I own an acre of land now in rural Ireland. I don't own it. I'm the steward of it. Yes, in some legal senses, I own it and so on and so forth, but I don't really own it. Other people had it before, other people will have it afterwards. And everyone should benefit if I buy a piece of land and sell a piece of land. Everyone. It's a commonwealth. So circular economy and that notion, the Commonwealth is another starting point. And the third starting point, I would argue, is the phrase that's used is to get rid of human exceptionalism, to stop thinking that humans are the only things that matter. We, humans, are part of a web, an interconnected, interdependent web of life on this planet. And sure, I'm going to prioritize my survival above the survival of a tree. I understand if a tiger's attacking the villagers will kill the tiger to, defend their children and so on. I get that. But the idea that the tiger doesn't matter or the tree doesn't matter is a toxic idea. We have separated ourselves from connection with the world we live in.
Nature, yeah.
Nature, but not only what we call nature. The thing is, when we talk about nature, we're suggesting it's something other than us. We are nature.
Very true.
We are animals. We are part of the living, breathing fabric of the earth, and so is everything else. And so my third starting point would be the unconditional acknowledgement of the right of every other thing to the experience of its life. And if, like indigenous peoples, if you are going to take the life of something else, whether that be a plant or an animal, you do so from a position of need and of respect and of gratitude. The fact that we live in a culture where animals are intensively factory farmed, it's an aberration. I mean, it's terrible for the animals, but it's terrible for us as well that we could live in a world and treat it with such contempt that we think other living things do not have the right to the experience of their life. So for me, 3 starting points: commonwealth,
So
getting rid of the notion of extraction as of the foundation of life. And we could call it respect for life. We could call it animism. It's, accepting that everything has a spirit and a life and everything has a right. There's not a single living thing that does not, in its way, try to preserve its right to its own experience of life. And when you stop that, you are committing an act of violence. And we all do it. I pull up a carrot from my garden. I've committed an act of violence. We have to live with our own violence. I get that. But we have to acknowledge it too. So those are my 3 starting points. Solutions, not for me to make solutions. Solutions will come from the actions of millions of people in the way they choose to live in the world. That's where the solutions will be found. They won't come top down. They'll come bottom up. My job is to stimulate ideas and to guide and coach people towards trying to live better.
Yeah. And then I've got something that has been, in my head ever since we spoke about your schooling and your childhood, John.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, when did the self-discovery happen? When did you discover yourself? When did you know what you wanted to do? Did it happen during this, end of the school or University of Leeds, or much after that?
Self-discovery, well, it's an ongoing process, isn't it? And I don't want to get really awkward, but I wonder whether the self actually exists. So I'm not sure that you can have self-discovery, but that's another whole thing which we don't need to go into here at all. The discovery of what I wanted to do from this perspective where I am now is a very interesting question. I discovered what I wanted to do with my adult life when I was 18. I now look back and wonder whether that was what I wanted to do, or whether that was what felt like it was a way of escaping from what I no longer wanted. As in, I was at a, anti-intellectual, anti-art, sport-obsessed school with, I have to say, an undercurrent of violence and paedophilia, which had been there for decades. I found my tribe at school doing plays, making music, hanging out with the freaks and weirdos. My career, I would have done drama at university. There weren't many drama courses back in the 80s, but there were some, but my parents wouldn't have it. They wanted me to do something more useful. So I did English literature at university, which was a compromise. And I continued to find my tribe among the freaks and the weirdos. I use the word freaks and weirdos with deep affection because I consider myself one of the freaks and weirdos. I became an actor. I did a postgraduate degree in drama, but by then, of course, I'd already decided that was my path. I didn't know whether I was going to be an academic or a teacher or an actor or whatever, but I knew that I was in that world. And so I had a very interesting experience. Actually, it wasn't pandemic. It was when I had the heart attack, which was about a year before the pandemic hit, about 9 months before the pandemic hit. A few days after I'd had the heart attack, I was in hospital and awaiting sort of decisions to be made about what treatment to have. And the heart attack was a massive shock. I mean, I was a physical performer, a physical theatre worker. I trained people in the use of their bodies. I was healthy. I was very active. I still performed. And I had been completely ignoring the growing pain in my chest for about a year, which was in itself a little bit shocking, as I spent my time telling people to become really aware of what's happening in their body, and I was completely ignoring the fact that I was in excruciating pain a lot of the time. But nonetheless, I had the heart attack. I was in hospital waiting treatment options, and one morning, about 5 o'clock in the morning, I had curtained off my bed. I was in a ward with 3 other men, curtained off my bed. I was by the window. It was in the summer, so it was getting light very early. The curtains of the window were open, and outside the window was a tree, and on the tree was a bird, and the bird was singing. And I realized with a passion that I wanted to live, that I did not want to die, that the most important thing in that was not being an artist, or rather my artistic career. The most important thing was to go back into something which I had ignored through my whole life, which is the other side of me, a passionate, uncompromising need to be in intimate relationship with nature. I'm a wild boy. I'm a nature boy. And I realized I had ignored that because I'd spent my life going city to city, spent so much of my time inside studios, directing shows, training people. I don't regret any of it. I love that work and I miss it. But in that moment, listening to the bird song, I went, I'm not sure I did in the end make the best choice. Now, of course, it's a useless thing to think. So all I can go is, I think it's time to make a new choice. And so I made a new choice. And although I still do train artists a little bit, occasionally I teach and I write about that stuff and I mentor artists and I coach artists as well as other people. The non-negotiable now is that outside my window just there, I see across 4 miles to the mountains, and beyond that another set of mountains, and there's one house that I can see. And I've got a wild acre out the back of this house where I'm growing forest. And when I finish this call, I will walk to the beach, one of the 3 beaches I can walk to, a wild Atlantic beach. And I'm not saying it means I don't work. This is my work. My work now is walking to the beach, because when I walk to the beach, I think, and when I think, I have something to give to those I coach or what I'm writing. So how do you find what you do? You make the best choice you can. You really reflect and try to taste what your purpose is. I call purpose a feeling of rightness. It's not something you can put into a spreadsheet. It's a feeling of rightness. And you go back to it again and again and say, is this still right? Or do I need something else in my life? Do I need to add something in, or do I need to change direction radically? I've now found a new purpose. Will it be my life's purpose? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how things will be 5 years from now. I do know that the skills and insights that I've developed mean that I will be able to hear when this purpose no longer serves me, and I will have the strategies and the skills to change direction. Won't be easy, will involve pain and grieving, and that's not to be stuck. Because you see, that's what actors know. They play one role and then they put it down and they play the next role, and they do both of them authentically.
Amazing. Absolutely. And, this is not a question that we're only asking you. We ask this to all our guests, connected to what you just shared with us. What would you like to have been written on your epitaph, John?
He grew a forest.
Super. That's going to be the highlight of this show. So we are going to keep that short. So wow, awesome. UT, questions.
I'm more intrigued to ask you, how was your journey in the world of acting?
Well, I started off as an actor, but back in the 80s, when I was starting, there was a movement which was a very radical physical theatre movement. It's got a history, it goes back through theatre history, through directors like Grotowski and Meyerholt and so on. But in the 70s, with people like Steven Berkoff and so on, there was a growth in the use of the body. And I was part of that movement, basically, tangential part. There's great, important people older than me still working who come from that time, David Glass and Peter Lilly and people like that. Really important people. But I was part of that movement. It was radical, it was political, it was anti-racist, it was anarchist or hard left, all of those things. I was all of that, pro-gay rights, anti-racism, feminist, all of those, things that we seem to be at war about in the 1980s, and perhaps we are still at war about. And as part of being an actor, I also needed to earn money, because you sure as hell don't earn money being an actor, particularly a radical actor in experimental theatre. So I also started working as a director in a youth theatre, working in a inner city, working class, open access youth theatre, which meant anyone could come into it, no auditions or anything like that, in an area which is a predominantly white working class area of a northern English city of Leeds, dealing with questions around racism. It was close to the football ground, all of that stuff. It wasn't exclusively white working class, but yeah. And there you got to deliver work straight. You haven't got time to do experimentation and exploring complex processes. You've got to deliver. There's kids there who are going, you got 10 seconds to convince me, otherwise I'm out of here. So I became really interested in the meeting point between the very accessible and the really experimental. I never went down the road of going, community work or work with working class kids or whatever has to be simple. I go, crap. No. The more disadvantaged a community is, the greater their needs, the better the art you have to do with them. So I've been passionate about that. And it made me ask a lot of questions about how do you teach? How do people use their bodies? What is the relationship between body and mind? How do we really change our thinking to empower ourselves as bodies? How do we connect with each other in ways that are empowered and respectful, but not getting hung up on being polite all the time? All of this stuff, that moved me into thinking about what it is to be human, the human system, the human body. And increasingly, I was working in improvisation, because life is an improvisation. This conversation's an improvisation. Your day is an improvisation. Nobody gave you a script first thing this morning and said, this is everything that's going to happen. The skills of improvisation are the skills of life. And I became more and more fascinated in both being an improvising performer, but also training people through improvisation. And still, improvisation is at the heart of everything I think about. And then actually somebody from the Swedish Ballet Academy saw my work and went, oh, you should come and teach some dancers. So I taught dancers, and then I started teaching circus performers and And always in that, there was an element of performance. But what I never really was, and I sometimes regret this, but what I never really was a straight down the line actor. Give me a part, I learn the lines, I find the actions, I deliver the performance. I was more of an improviser, more of an experimenter. I'm okay with that, usually. But then sometimes I go, I'd like to have won an Oscar. That would have been good. It'd have been great to, I have my acceptance speech prepared and all of that stuff. Wow. But yeah, it was a journey in and out of acting. And then as I became better known as an acting teacher, a lot of my work would be, for example, in India, where I taught many times. And there, of course, you're intersecting a lot with the film industry. Most actors in India are in one way or another trying to work in Mumbai in the film industry, because it's the only way they get to earn any money. So I had to start thinking about how to deliver in commercial environments, and that sense of going, you haven't got 2 weeks to prepare a performance, you've got 25 seconds and the director screaming now, how do you deliver? So all of those things became really fascinating to me. But it all just grew from a desire to be in community. We could take that back to being excluded from community at school. For me, performance has always been about connection with other performers, and while you are performing, you build a complete world in that theatre space. If you do it well, everybody is wrapped up in a world, and for that moment, people who've never met each other before are in profound shared relationship, and at the end they breathe and go, we've traveled a journey, and then they break the spell and they applaud and all of that stuff, and we go our separate ways. But for me, performance is about the building of temporary communities where we can imagine different worlds. Even if we're talking very realistic about the world that exists, we can look at things differently. And that's why I will fight with every breath for the artist, whether a professional artist or the kid at school who's doing drama, to be given total respect. Kids should be doing drama and music and art at school every single day, because it is the life force. It is where we get to be fully human. And I'll fight for that against anyone.
You have one more believer in that. Wow, 100%.
It makes at least two of us then.
Sure.
Yeah, make it 3.
So
brilliant.
One thing that, of course, this is going to be aired in India, John, and, our Indian audience would be really, really excited to know. Anything that you want to share in terms of anecdotes that have happened in the Mumbai film industry? Anything that you remember? Could be funny, could be anything that impacted or you still remember.
It's only more general in some ways, but Indian film performers, they say, our film industry is really bad at this, it's better elsewhere, or we're not very good at this, it's better elsewhere. It's never better elsewhere. It is never better somewhere else. There are real strengths to the way the commercial Bollywood operates. There are real strengths to the way the TV industry in India operate. There are real strengths to the way the independent film industry in India operates.
What did you like? What do you remember?
I like the need to deliver. That sometimes you just have to go, what's the outcome? How do I get to the outcome? There's an urgency to performance sometimes. I don't like the fact that sometimes that means that people don't get a chance to be respected or heard or to prepare. But, there's pluses and minuses to everywhere. That's why I say it's never better anywhere else. So, what I like in the film industry in India, or generally it's not the film industry so much as among so many of the artists I've met in India, is a hunger, a desire to be an artist, to communicate, to say something. Some of them want to, represent their communities or their backgrounds. Some of them want to tell stories. Some of them want to, bring Hindu mythology into the world stage. All of these things, the urgency and the hunger, I really like. What I don't like so much is that it's harder for those who are not going for the mainstream to find spaces in India to be different as an artist, both economically harder and also socially harder. I would say to all Indian artists, don't think it's better elsewhere, because it really isn't. It really isn't. Everywhere has its problems, but do absolutely trust your passion. The world needs passionate storytellers, and it doesn't matter whether that's in a multi-crore Indian movie or it's you telling a story to 5 kids in a classroom. It doesn't matter. Tell the stories that you're ready to tell, and get really good at telling stories, because the world not only needs artists, it needs great artists. And I've loved the enthusiasm and the passion that I've seen in India and also in other countries where perhaps people feel things are economically harder, like Colombia, where I've worked, or Mexico, where I've worked. There's a passion and an urgency and a need. Greece, where I've worked a lot, which is economically in such a mess. generally better quality of art than I've ever seen in an industrialized, rich Western country. Generally, not that, not always, but.
And your favorite Bollywood movie?
I don't have one because I don't watch movies very much. So I whenever you ask me my favorite movies, I go, I don't have a TV, you see. I don't watch TV, and I don't live anywhere close to a cinema. So, and whenever I was in India, I'd be working. So I'm pretty ignorant about contemporary culture, about what's going on out there. My favorite movie, Bollywood movie, is whatever the Bollywood movie is that somebody I know and respect has just been in. And I go, that's the best movie ever, because I'm an unconditional supporter of the people who, I worked with and care for.
Wonderful. These are short questions, rapid fire. Black or white?
White.
Films or theater?
Theater.
Urban life or a life out suburban life?
As remote as possible.
What's your favorite place in this world?
On the edge of the sea in a storm.
What makes you cry?
Everything.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years from now?
I really don't know. I really don't know. But I hope I'll be making a difference to people.
Awesome. With that, we conclude this section. Over to you, UT.
Thanks a lot for that. And I'm sure that this interview, when people will watch this interview, they will understand what is the importance of being yourself. What a wonderful journey you have had with your self-discovery, to your acting, to being a mentor or, coaching people. And again, right at the end, currently what you're doing is to be by yourself. And again, it's self-discovery. As we said, journey is not a destination. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. Absolutely brilliant. So would our viewers. And thanks a lot, John, for this. Thanks a lot from my, bottom of my heart. I would like to thank you for being so open, so honest, touching almost about everything in your life. And what else can I say? Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a real joy to talk with both of you. And let's stay in touch because there's lots of interesting ideas floating around here. It's been a real pleasure to talk with both of you. So I thank you deeply.
Absolutely. We'll stay in touch. Thank you so much for your time as well, John.
Thank you.
Have a great